Thanks for coming.
Hello.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good to see you.
I'm Wanda.
Yeah.
This is Paul Martin.
Oh, hi.
He's our director of facilities here.
Oh, hi. Nice meeting you, Paul. Actually, I saw you at one of the board.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes.
Yeah, I just don't recognize the name, that's all.
Yeah.
So
Do you
this
have
is,
everything you need?
I think we pretty well. Oh,
We won't be here.
are we broadcasting yet? Oh, not yet. Okay, let's go back. Yes, good.
everything you need?
I think so.
Okay.
You, I'm good. Yeah, it was actually mixed weather. In the month of April. Throughout the whole Pacific Island.
Didn't even go through an okay.
More rain than usual. First of all, it was hours. Memories of 2000. Island. All of a sudden. 50% of the time was the other 50% of the time was just humid. It's a little bit more humid, funky, not comfortable. With the windstorm, one section of my fence, which was already weakened, up on the side. Thank God, no human or dog was helpful. It was really windstorm. So our housekeeper who was watching the house actually texted us a picture. Call the contractor. They'll probably not be final.
That's funny.
I saw, well, someone. But it was fell. David, this is your show, man. Yes. Nursing. That's the one on, yeah. What was that? hosting some kind of. Central EGs. Take some pictures. Prime location too. You know, when you have the first debate. Yeah. So now it's official. Critical is responsible for coordinating critical care transfer out of the They just can't. And I will follow it. Yep. So, you're hiding, you. The Mike and Charlie show. We got more money for Michener. Funding letter coming in that Hey, he was wondering. Her hair is looking so lovely. Come on. guys do it on Sunday, so I'll try not to, spray on semi-permanent. Watch it all go slowly, it'll fade out.
I just called it and now back to black.
Come on, join us on the front row.
And I looked in the mirror and sure enough it looked like
You never know, Victoria's shoulders.
and I looked at him and
There's more coming in today. This is because they're dropping the so they have to sit it all out. That's why they're today tomorrow, so basically well, there's one. Hey, you're here.
welcome back.
Thank you. Oh, it's one I wasn't even close. Totally. time yet? Not 12 yet. All right. Don't get too excited yet. So now it's 12 noon, and we're ready to kick off the second. It's still called CEO Town Hall. Emma's right. Should be called Executive Town Hall because we focus on various executive VPs' portfolio. Mike did such a fabulous job last time that people wish that he's growing hair between March to now, but he yeah. So for today, it's a slightly different website for those of you who are going to type in your question, and it's posted here. We decided to use this particular one. What happened last time was we were using it on trial, and there was a limit on how many questions can be posted, and we reach our maximum. And that's why some of you who was typing in question afterwards probably don't see your question listed there. So this time, I hope that we will be able to take on more questions now that we are actually subscribing to something formally. And this is what you need to code in, okay? Okay, so as I promised last time, some of you asked a question, when are we going to announce about the appointment of the new CEO? And we did. Shortly after the town hall, Dr. Kevin Smith will be joining us in 2 weeks. May 22nd will be his starting date. But I can tell you Kevin has been in town multiple occasions. He has already joined us at the board retreat about 2 weeks or so ago. And he has met numerous people, both at the board level, at the executive level, and also at the senior management level. Kevin is stepping down as CEO of a big system in Hamilton, Niagara Falls, and St. Catharines area. And he's joining us. Apart from UHN role, Kevin is quite well known within the Council of Academic Hospital of Ontario. In some way, under the circumstances, that the incident happened so close to our major trauma center in Toronto. And I have to think that's why probably some of the lives were saved, simply because of the proximity. And as someone mentioned it to me, it could easily have happened on University Avenue, outside of our doorstep. And if it were to happen outside of our doorstep, I really wonder how well we would have coped. Even though, you know, Sinai Emergency Room is there, UHN, Toronto General Site is right there, we will probably have to struggle quite a bit because we are not a trauma center. How do we stabilize and then work with the EMS to make sure that those cases that really need to go to the trauma center are being driven off as quickly as possible? So it then basically called into how well are we prepared. We have done some code silver, we've done some code orange, table exercise, but there's no question that I think given what has happened, we need to learn from the folks at Sunnybrook And our emergency preparedness team certainly have done that, and we'll learn as much as we can from them, and we are going to actually plan out to actually conduct more drills and simulation exercises. So I'm sure all of you feel the same way as I am, and so as we actually go and start planning this out, I'm looking forward to everyone doing their part to participate and learn from it, because it may, hopefully, all we learn is drill, but someday it may happen, and it definitely happened in our city. A few sort of highlights over the last 2 or 3 months. A few called out, as you can see, to Toronto Rehab Site, the Western Site, and the General Site, because as the Caring Safely team has been rolling out some of the bundles in managing one of the hospital-acquired condition, like pressure injury to the patient, these are some of the units that, as of the last count, have reached 100% completion of their risk assessment. Thank you very much. And then the next one is an applause to all of you, because when we rolled out the Caring Safely safety, behavior, and error prevention 2 bundles training module, our target was set at 75%. So the good news is we finished the fiscal year hitting 77% across all UHN. Congratulations. For the remainder of the 23%, don't worry, the training module is still going on. So you have every single opportunity to sign up. And actually, the team is now working on developing e-learning module and also the newer modules for all our staff, and especially for 6,000 trainees that comes in every single year to UHN. A few highlights again, calling out, I'm not going to call out each and every single unit, but as you can see, some of the other hospital-acquired infection, such as central line infection, prevention of falls, here's some of the units that have shown it to us. It can be done. Even though we are in one of the most complex hospitals taking care of some of the sickest immunosuppressed patients, that we can indeed prevent prevention. And if actually we all work hard, including patients and their family members, we can also prevent falls as well. So congratulations. And then last but not least, I'm going to hand over the podium to Dr. David Jaffray, who all of you know is our EVP of Technology and Innovation. And you're all looking forward to this, right? This is the IT digital update. And so he's going to give a bit of an intro, and then David and I will then take whatever question you want to fire at us. Thank you.
Thank you. It's great to be here and participate in a conversation around technology at UHN. I'm not going to do like a long presentation. We were just actually 3 slides. And we really wanted to have an opportunity to talk to you about where technology is going at UHN. And I mean, of course, the most topical technology is around digital. And if you just think back a decade ago, we all knew about electronic things in many ways, and there were computers, but the experience in the past 10 years and even more rapidly in the past 5 years about how important digital is to everything we're doing moving forward has become dramatic. I go into every meeting and someone's talking about the need and maybe the safety issue or a quality issue or a communication issue or a finance issue, and then inevitably they look like this at me and say, when's that going to be available? And it's remarkable how much expectation has been built around our capacity to become really good at managing digital technologies, not just from the way we work perspective, but from a safety perspective, from a quality perspective, from an efficiency, from a quality of work life perspective for our clinicians or for our nurses. I mean, it's extremely, complex to work with these tools. And so in many ways, we have to really be thinking about the next 5 or 10 years from the point of view that this is going to be so important for us. We have to really think about that, about the strategy. And so what we wanted to do is to spend time today talking about digital, what we're thinking, where things are going, maybe what our new CEO thinks a little bit, and I'm just going to give a little bit of background on where we are from where we started a little while ago. And I thought I'd just do 3 slides that maybe kind of lay out some of the points in time that many of you remember or recollect. It was Charlie working with Lydia and advancing the advanced clinical documentation tools back in 2013, 2014. The organization was quite engaged in figuring out how could we better document clinically, because it's so important for the care of our patients. And we embarked on this trajectory for advanced clinical documentation, went through a procurement process, and we started to add up the cost. And we started to think about, how does it impact research? How is it going to impact education? And we're an educationalist. How are these tools going to come together to support us? How is it going to impact research from a clinical trials perspective? How are we going to pull the data together? And as we marched through that, we saw this price increase, and it got pretty significant. And in many ways, what we're doing is we're procuring a technology that was going to be somewhat about the technology, but a lot about the change. A lot about the change that was going to be required for us to really be leading in digital, because we could see this future coming. And that number ballooned up to almost $600 million. There's some interest charges in there, but a lot of it was change management, changing the way we're going to have to work. And we hadn't really got all the pieces. Research was saying, well, this won't harm us. Continue, that's okay. But at the end of the day, as an organization that has to fulfill its purpose of caring, teaching, and discovery, we need a much more integrated perspective. And so we hit the pause and we did an analysis of, is UHN really built for this future? Are we aligned and structured well? And that external review showed us how we were spending some money and the level of performance we had from an IT perspective. And it highlighted the degree of disaggregation and number of boundaries in the organization that were going to be ultimately an impediment for our digitally enabled future. And so we began a process which many of you have been participated in, and it's been very challenging, actually restructuring how we're built to participate fully in this future digital world. And so we've been working very hard. It's a little bit behind the scenes, although many of you who are in digital don't see it as behind the scenes. There's a lot of change there. You can see Steve doing a lot of work to understand exactly what this change means. And we transformed over 22 different IT teams, fragmented, groups of 2, groups of 10, groups of 30, a big group called SIMS, into a single organization that is positioned to bring leading practice and digitally enable UHN's future. Because this is a key foundational element that has to be in place. And with that in place, we can really prepare for that future. So what does this transformation look like and what has been happening? It's been happening since we first started about a year last January. We first brought the team together. We created the UHN digital brand. And over the past year, we've been working with the organization to build greater transparency, a single defined IT budget. We now know what we're spending on what. We have a strong talent pool that's been drawn together from across the organization, and we're adding to that pool. And over the past few months, we've been building a roadmap for the organization that we can all see in terms of what we're working on. Digital can see it, but so can the clinical research and education teams see it as a shared plan, and that's come forward quite nicely and is now being supported by the executive. We also had to get back to basics. We had 3 different email systems. We couldn't even tell you how many UHN users there were, really. Over the past year, we've brought together them all under one collaboration tool, the Office 365 platform, one email solution. And this is really important. In the future, as we start to want to automate things, so that 2552 form disappears, it just magically floats from one inbox to the other, or maybe you just log into a self-serve. If we're going to do that, we have to know who everybody is. We have to know how they're structured. We have to know how their relationships are to their manager. Because if you click, I want that laptop, it'd be really good if it automatically popped up on your manager's thing to say, yes, I agree, that person should have that laptop. It's a standard laptop. It'll be standard configured. It'll be delivered right to their desk because we know where they are. We don't have that data together the way it needs to be. So we've been working very hard to do that. And it applies to many different things in the organization, including a single sign-on experience for the clinicians who currently have multiple steps to go through. If you get this right, you should be able to come through with one login, tunnel all the way through the organization with the new network tools we put in place, and use the tools, not multiple logins, remember multiple passwords, and so on and so forth. Also a lot of foundational work, although we had a little glitch this morning with the network. We know exactly where that problem is, and we're working on it. We've re-engineered our network capacity. It was only like 14 months ago that our connection to the outside world from UHN to the internet was less, speed than my connection at home, 0.6 gig for all of UHN. So over the past year and a half, the team has done a ton of work. Tom Goldthorpe and many others in the organization working very hard to configure and design a completely new topology that's fast, pushing 20 gig out there, and upgraded our support. And one of the things that I'm most excited about is a completely new customer care paradigm that draws from the experience of high-performing customer service teams that are already in UHN. Teams like RIS's support team, teams like the radiation medicine support team, which is this technology support team that you call and say, I've got a technology problem, and they figure out who to call to solve that problem. And that level of customer support, where we're hiring some 40 people from outside the organization to join us and replicate that those 40 people are spending time with groups of support like we have in radiation medicine and RIS to learn that culture. And we'll have then teams of 10 dedicated at each of the campuses managing and coordinating. This is key foundational work. And standardization, this is what I pointed out earlier, enables automation and increases efficiency. So this is work we've been doing in the background, and some people might say, I want to see the exciting future, and so do I. I'm very excited about this exciting future. And we've done some very exciting new things, which I'm not going to talk about. Mike Nader, for example, has a business intelligence tool that lets him watch how many people are in the ER, how many people are actually going to be moving into the hospital, how much demand then is going to be showing up in the beds in the hospital. And the team's been working, crafting this heads-up display. It's not really a heads-up, it's a big screen. But the nice thing, he can log in on his laptop, or he can log in on his mobile device, because it's all Office 365 one experience to make that happen. And these are important pieces. So moving forward, we're actually positioned very strong from a digital strategy perspective. And the timing, from my perspective, couldn't be better. We have a new CEO that's joining us. We have the opportunity to make a big decision around our clinical information system, which is a core subsystem that sits within all the digital elements at UHN. And to make that in a way that's thoughtful, to make that in a way that the leadership is here at the time of the decision. We can make sure we finance it well. We can make sure it's aligned with the provincial strategies. We can make sure that whatever we choose, that company is going to be there into the future, so it doesn't suddenly change on us. That's very important. But we can also make sure that we have that tool with a lot of thought about provider experience and patient experience. Because the selection of these kinds of tools has a huge impact on the clinical experience for the staff. And we want to make sure that we really try to address that moving forward. So we're in a very strong position from a strategy perspective. We've laid the foundation for the selection of our next generation electronic medical record technology platform. We have QuadraMed in the race. We have advanced our operational capabilities to enable the change management associated with new digital solutions. There's a lot of change management required as you roll these new technologies out. And operationally, we've become more skilled as an organization in following through in those changes. And I've found really recently over the past year or so that the board and the executive are extremely aligned to making necessary investment to make this happen at a real scale and to plan that out and align that. So I thought I would sort of share that perspective with you. I don't want to talk anymore. I want to hear questions. And I'm happy to share the microphone space with Charlie Chan.
Thanks, Charlie. Thank you, David, for that. So we do have Slido up here on the screen, as we mentioned earlier. Before we jump into that, I wanted to look towards the audience to see if we have any questions to kick things off.
So why don't I take on the third question? Here's my challenge to David. Because next Monday morning, when you see me in the hallway, I'm going to be tricolor. Yellow, purple, and pink. So don't get scared, say hello. All right? So David, you can decide before next week what color you're going to paint.
You're still CEO, Charlie? Yeah.
As of next week, I will still be.
Damn.
Yeah. All right, Matt, why don't you drive the bus for us?
Well, sorry, actually to go back to that, but David, so the second question on the screen here while we're on the topic, you have so much hair, will you be coloring it to conquer cancer?
Okay, who from the foundation planted that one? I see her. I see all of you. Well, I'll keep it a surprise.
Okay, and with that, we'll jump back to the audience then. Looking towards the audience, does anybody have any questions to kick things off?
Okay, Marianne.
Question for David. From the operating room perspective, we're looking at, we're badly in need of a new module for our IT system in the OR, right from scheduling through to all the data we need to collect on an operation. What should we do? What should our next step be? We're kind of looking at standalone products right now. What would your advice be for us?
I mean, I think this is really important there's two elements of this. The first one is UHN has a big scheduling problem. We have a lack of good scheduling tools across the whole organization. And we need to really work on that as a broader strategy. Our staff scheduling is complicated, our nursing scheduling, our infrastructure scheduling is nowhere it needs to be. So Mike Nader and I, his team in OSS, who's all about process and optimization and looking for the right way to do things, we're collaborating this year to map the scheduling needs across the organization. Because, I mean, we bring in one scheduling system there, another scheduling system there, we'll lose efficiencies and benefits. So we've got a structure together to work to map what the scheduling needs are across the organization and come up with a solution by the end of this year in terms of how we're moving forward with scheduling. And that will affect what's happening in the ORs because the ORs are schedule-heavy, dependency. And in terms of new systems for the OR, from a sort of ORSOS, paradigm, those kinds of elements, I think we're going to look over the next year, and one of the tenets of the clinical information system decision making is that we want to basically choose to align as many of the modules with whatever platform we choose from a strategic perspective. So I see as we move forward over the next year with our decision making around the clinical information system, we're going to want to look at what the possible solutions are for the OR as part of that process. I mean, it's going to take us time to do that. I mean, we've got a full plate this year already on a whole bunch of IT projects that have been set by the teams in terms of priority. And so I'd see that as fitting in because I think that core component is something we really want to tie in well with our new clinical information system strategy. It's a hang on, but I think the key thing is scheduling has to be addressed. And if there's one system that we'd like to start to align really well with our core inpatient infrastructure, I think is the OR solution.
There was a question earlier that got bumped, but maybe I'll take a crack at that, and then we'll go back to David to answer more digital-specific question. There was a question asked about if we could not afford Epic 3 years ago, how come we are able to, or how are we going to fund it? I think the landscape has changed. So 3+ years ago, we would have been one of the very first hospital to commit to a major capital expenditure to bring on a new hospital information system. And back then, it was not very clear from the ministry point of view whether you could count it as a capital and how much of it is operating, and if it goes into the operating, even if we manage to sort of find some money or borrow money for it, how is it going to then make us look in terms of hospital efficiency? Because every year, the ministry look at us based on our cost per weighted case. How much does it cost to provide one episode of care? And if our cost goes up because of these incremental investment, we could be actually penalized by the ministry because it would appear that we were very inefficient when in actual fact we were making huge investment to make the care more efficient and safer for our patients. What has happened is that the ministry has actually acknowledged that, to the extent that the ministry actually has come out with a health information strategy, which David can actually follow up and comment on. So the fact that the ministry is trying to align all 130 hospitals across Ontario to actually have a strategy to upgrade the digital or the health information system means that we would be on equal playing field. And we can then learn from the hospital that have gone ahead of us in terms of how they manage, in terms of the incremental expenses. Then that way, I think it's way easier for us to actually deal with that. The other factor that I have to keep in mind is we were one of the first hospitals in Ontario to raise about $320 million in bonds. And that was way back, over 20 years ago. And that bond will be paid off 2023, is that right, Darlene? So basically, within the next 4 years, that bond is paid off. So in essence, that would be our ability, if you like. If we bridge it until 2023, we then basically can use the same amount of money that we have been able to achieve every year through our efficiency that used to pay for that bond, then it can actually be part of our solution. I'm not saying that we'll be spending all of it on digital, but at least that would be part of our strategy. Anyway, do you want to comment on the provincial?
I mean, that's what I refer to as the tech bond. I mean, tech is so important for what we're doing in the organization. We have to start thinking about, we built a bond to build a building, but I mean, what's the stuff inside that building is super critical. And even from an infrastructure point of view, digital and the infrastructure team are working much closer together now to try to coordinate, because the buildings are machines now, and we need to think about and how that works out. So I mean, from a tech bond point of view, I've articulated that we need to have an investment in tech moving forward. So from an investment point of view, that's key. I mean, I have had a good conversation with Kevin, just actually on Saturday, about the strategy for a clinical information system, and he's had an experience in rolling out Epic at St. Joe's, and he had some experience in that process, and he's got an interaction that he's found was pretty comfortable with the company. And I think one of the things we're going to want to do is we're going to want to ask, what do we want to achieve? What do we want for the experience for our clinicians and our patients? And make sure we push that envelope, as UHN should be doing, should be pushing the envelope, not just buying whatever's available, but we're going to leverage the rest of the parts of the solution. We're going to leverage the fact that the province has been pushing these companies to stand up cloud-based instances of these systems that we can just light up inside our ecosystem with our standardized IT identity, logged in with your single sign-on. We're going to line up to that. And we're going to talk to the province about how, if UHN does become a hub for one of these technologies, how do we support those around us, and how can they support us from an operating and investment and change management perspective. And so that, all those dimensions are coming together, and knowing that we can land it on a stable framework, a stable team that now has the infrastructure in place, I think it's a really exciting time. In many ways, things have really come together for decision and for bringing the investment forward.
So, Charlie, David, just while we're on the topic as well, if we're looking at the second question on Slido here, do you have any additional comments that you want to add in terms of how UHN intends on funding a new EPR?
Well, I mean, I will start, as I said, we have always managed to find some operation efficiency, and as we are planning for 18-19, we are continuing to invest into digital just like we are investing in our facilities, because those are the areas that we need a lot to catch up. So that's currently is happening, but that's really the foundation. The incremental step is once we landed on, and you know, David, you can comment more, but I think the goal of our new CEO, Kevin, is to basically have made a decision regarding what we need to bring on, in addition to what we already have in terms of HIS. And once we have landed on that decision within the next 12 months, then I think we're going to look towards our business guys to say, how do we actually find the financing to actually bridge us until our bond is paid off in 2023. And that could be through some fundraising, because we have always been successful in raising money for buildings, for programs, for big, sexy equipment, but technology or digital transformation, bringing in some of the artificial intelligence stuff into it, is probably as equally sexy for the next 10 years. And depending on how we package that, we should be able to find various ways of actually supporting it. So, David, you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to build a business case for it. That sounds really painful, and it probably will be a little bit painful, but we have to do that. And we have our staff doing a lot of inefficient things all the time. And it's frustrating for them, and it's not very pleasant, I'm sure, for the patients and the delays. And so there are natural efficiencies that should come for that, and that should be part of the business case, where, I mean, we're going to be able to do different things that are more, you know, appropriate for humans to be doing, then clicking multiple times. And that's why I think the patient experience piece, and that has to go into the business case. The efficiencies that we gain are important. The fact that we capture codes properly and we maximize our returns and we track our expenses as a business, that's part of the business case for these things, like getting rid of the transcription architecture as we currently have it, and using NLP solutions, so voice. Those all come. I mean, maybe we shouldn't have a million different billing systems across the organization. We had one that was easy to use and automated. So that business case has to be built, and we have to do that over the next year. And then how we bootstrap it with tech bond, for example, or for support for the ministry. This is the whole case has to be built. But we now have an informed position. Systems are stable. We're functioning. I like to say, don't go shopping when you're hungry at the grocery store. You buy cookies and the chips, and we're stable. We can make a really informed decision and make a good business case for it as well.
Great, thank you. I will look back to the audience to see if we have any questions before we jump back to Slido. All right, no? Okay.
Back to Slido.
So let's jump to the first question. This one's been up here for a while. Do we have business intelligence, data analytics here at UHN to allow management to make decisions based on data?
We need to do more work here. There's no question. I mean, we looked at what Sick Kids did. They poured several $1 million into an enterprise data warehouse, and they put up all kinds of screens that show all the numbers in the organization, and we talked with them at length. And it was actually, the executives had to be convinced to look at the screens that were generated for them, because they weren't generated for their own business interests. So we took a completely different approach, and I've been working with Mike Nader, who runs the biggest operation in the organization, the clinical operations. And our team has been working to ask Mike, what do you need to see at 7 a.m. so you know the business will be successful at 5 p.m.? And that's the kind of question that gets posed. And the team's been using out-of-the-box BI, business intelligence tools, tapping into the data sets in the back end, and working very closely with the business leads to figure out what exactly do you need to achieve your objective. Rather than make a whole bunch of screens that we have to maintain, no one's looking at, we want to go right to the experience of the business leads. And that strategy, I think, is working well. I'm not going to put words in Mike's mouth, but if he wants to say something, he should feel free to. And this is the beginning of a strategy. Now, when we do that, we show that screen, we make sure it helps Mike, but then he starts to see data from that screen, and he goes, that's not consistent with the other data. So when we start pulling, we realize there's some flaws in the data. And so Michael Caesar's team has been working to say, well, why are there flaws in the data? And there's flaws in the data, we have to stop that at the source. And if we keep going and following this trail, we position ourselves to be a really data-enabled organization. It's coming from the business pull to make sure the technology is enabling them. That's the paradigm we've been operating with. And Mike, if you want to comment, it'd be great.
So I think the work that we've gone through in terms of the business intelligence is, UHN has a lot of data. We don't necessarily have a lot of information coming from the data. So it's really trying to synthesize it, get it down to a place where you can actually see the data in a way that gives you information and knowledge. And so David mentioned, I have a number of screen captures, but really the process of getting the business intelligence was a process of having a dialogue with the digital team around what is it that we really need, because there were numerous times where I would sit with Michael Caesar and I'd say, it would be really cool if I could see this. And really what was important in that process was, okay, so if you see it, what changes? How are you going to use that information to change what you're doing every day? Because if you're not going to do it, then we have these tools called Cognos and other things for us to roll it out. So we've been piloting it. It's taken us the better of about 6 months to go through that process. We've now just rolled it out to the various site vice presidents, the one dashboard page. We have our flow team who also has access to the information. And we're slowly getting to the process of beginning to engage different levels of the organization to begin to identify and define that. The challenge is just managing expectation, because when you see these beautiful dashboards, everybody says, hey, I want one. And the problem that we could run into is a situation where we now develop 150 dashboards, of which only 5 of them are being seen at any point in time, and it really doesn't bring great value to the organization.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Mike. So let's jump to the top question once again. Can you tell us a little bit about the work that's being done to ensure Peter Monk's vision of AI-enabled cardiac care is being realized? And what machine learning projects are envisioned over the course of the next several years?
That must come from Barry. So I'll hand it to David to answer.
It actually didn't come from me.
Didn't come from you? That's pretty cool. So it came from somebody out there. I mean, this is super exciting for us. We know that there are always next generation technologies coming. And while we're talking about a clinical information system that has to support our needs of today and tomorrow, we have to also, as UHN, be thinking about the tomorrows of tomorrow and what's coming next. And Peter Monk, visionary guy, if you ever heard his talk that he gave when he announced the donation, it was so compelling. He pushes constantly, it was very clear. So when we were working with Barry on the proposal for the Peter Monk Cardiac Center, Phase 4, we started to talk about digital future, about how AI and machine learning and data flowing is going to be key to create a learning health hospital, learning health system that actually lets us learn from every patient that we treat. And so we've been working with some support through the Rogers Gift as well. This is the collaboration that comes together to make a data lake. And a data lake is a place that can take all kinds of data of different types, and it kind of remembers for you. I mean, can I describe what I think a data lake is like?
Go for
okay,
it.
so this is my paradigm of data lake. Imagine if you went shopping and you have things in your basement. Emma, do you have things in your basement? Do you have stuff in your basement you can't even remember is there? Okay, everybody has that problem. So the data lake is a little bit like this. Imagine just coming home and just throwing something down in the basement and saying, blue shoes, this is the date, $19, and it just goes in the basement. And then 3 years later, you're going, I bought some shoes. I think they were blue. And in the basement, because you described the metadata around that object. And so what we're doing in the context of the cardiac setting is we're streaming 50 different data streams now into this data lake from data sources from across UHN. You think 50 is a lot, but the reality is if you think about Internet of Things, each one of you can stream data right now at very high velocities. And so we've been building a data lake that streams data from clinical systems and research systems. And the exciting part is we've been talking to Vector, and we've posted a position. Vector is the AI institute that you've all probably heard about, that's funded by the Ministry of the federal and provincial. And they're actually hiring someone to work with us as a partner to use state-of-the-art machine learning methods. And they're not just hiring someone because we want to work with them. They're hiring because we're getting our data in a pile. And because our data is coming together, they know that data is key. And so we're, with this data lake starting to form, we're now seeing really interesting results that involve not just look at a report from a cardiac stress test, but pull in the full EKG and analyze that completely differently and dig deeper. And this is the future of digital technologies. And we see this not as a research thing. We see this as an informing strategy. Why wouldn't we just have our MR scanners streaming it? Why wouldn't we have our Fitbits streaming into that same architecture? And so this is informing our strategy, and we are making progress.
Thanks, David. I think we have a question in the audience. Barry?
Thanks very much. So last week, 6 members from UHN went to the National Academy of Medicine in Washington to learn about clinician burnout, which is a pervasive problem in the United States and we think also in Canada. And one of the main drivers of burnout, which impacts 50% of nurses, is challenges dealing with electronic medical records and the requirement to deal with systems like Epic and Cerner and the challenges of actually negotiating the systems. And one of the solutions proposed is working with those companies to make this process more seamless and less stressful for the staff. Since we're on the cusp of getting something, can you describe how we're going to address that issue so that we don't create a problem by implementing Epic that makes for more stress on staff rather than less?
I mean, this is super critical. I mean, we see it already. The stress on the clinicians is affecting our ability to collaborate, our ability to make progress together. It's going to affect the experience of our patients. It's definitely affecting them. I think as an organization, we have to make sure we take that experience very seriously. And in the purchase of the clinical information system moving forward, or whoever we decide to partner with, I think personally, independent of funding, independent of alignment with the province, independent of everything else, we have to have that as the primary objective. Because if we just roll out another tool that the rest of the planet has already stated is not very easy to use and frustrates our clinical teams, I think we've made a terrible mistake. So we'll be challenged to make sure we keep that very much in the foreground. And we have to realize that our decision today is not the same decision that Charlie and Lydia were wrestling with 5 years ago. Technology's changed a lot in 5 years. And in this future, we should be talking to these vendors and saying, you know what, Epic, I don't know if I like your front end. Maybe your back end is pretty good, pretty solid, pretty stable, great data model. But maybe we should have a bring your own app paradigm that the human factors team has assessed. And maybe we have 2 or 3 different apps, and depending on what we need in the clinical system, but it's tuned to make sure that the experience is positive and successful, and there's safety and there's quality there. But we have to raise that and basically align with what we're hearing from the National Academy of Medicine, is that this has to be addressed, and technology is part of it. So it's up to us to get that in the foreground, because we can send something cheaper, but it's a lousy experience. I don't think that's a good trade-off. I think we should, set the bar high. And I think, so I talked to Kevin specifically about this issue, that we have to have the provider experience as a highest ranking, along with safety and quality on the system that we choose.
So maybe I'll add a couple of comments. I think it's fair to say that for some of the US experience, when they rolled out Epic and Cerner over the last 5 years or so, because as part of the Obama's sort of incentive, if you like, to digitalize a lot of the health information system, is that a lot of those EMR that were brought on, basically they just opened the box and expect the clinician, whether it's the nurses, whether it's the docs, the trainees, to just switch over from writing into typing. And not everyone is a good typist. We are from multiple generations. Some of us are faster than others. Others like me would still prefer a voice recognition. And as we were looking at Epic over 3 years ago, yeah, they would sell us voice recognition at the front end, but the licensing fee was huge. And that was so big for some of the US institutions that instead of paying for the voice recognition, they actually hire scribes. So these are people who actually work in the clinic, maybe even work on the unit, following the docs. The docs would still mouth it out and someone was typing it in. That's how they documented. And so while we were looking at Epic over 3 years ago, part of the reason our costs went so high, it wasn't the licensing fee of the EMR, it wasn't so much just the additional tools. The total, both capital as well as the software cost, was about just around 100 million, if I remember. We were going to spend 300 million to standardize a lot of the process, to build in a lot of those macro, if you like, so that you don't actually have to do all that typing. But that was what we thought that we were going to invest for over 18 months to bring all our standard work that were from the paper form into the electronic version, so as to minimize that kind of, if you like, having the clinician doing all the typing work to build it up once you have opened up the Epic. And I believe at SickKids, that's what a lot of docs have gone through, is that you have a standard template, and then you have to spend time to customize it. And I think Women's College has gone through that as well. And so we definitely have opportunity to learn from them in terms of what's good, what's bad, and what's ugly. And Kevin would also tell us in terms of their experience at St. Joe. So we'll learn from all of that. But the goal is, Kevin has said it to David, in 12 months, we'll make a decision. So.
Great. Thanks, guys. David, this next question is directed specifically at yourself. What keeps you up at night?
Wow.
At UHN specifically. What keeps you up at night?
I don't know. That's an interesting question. I think what keeps me up at night. I don't worry about the network too much because we have a really good network team, and I don't worry about the digital stuff pretty much because they're pretty good, and we have a lot of good technical folks in the organization. I think I worry about sort of where we're going. That's probably the most important thing to think about. Like, can we get aligned? Can we work together? Can we make something happen? So I think that's the most important thing to think about. That keeps me up a little bit at night.
All right. Fair enough.
I'll tell you what keeps me up at night related to
Sure.
digital. I would be worried if something happened to our server. For those of you who remember a few years ago, CompuCom, which is our vendor, that basically is responsible for our data warehouse. This is out somewhere. And there was some swan or something.
There's a goose.
There was a goose, a Canada goose. Somehow got fried within that electrical outlet area. And somehow the backup system did not kick in. And for those of you who remember that fabulous weekend, we had a code grade for, what is it? Michael Caesar, you were around. For how many hours? For 2 days. And that was when we opened our command center. And for those of you who were working, we basically have gone back to the code grade procedure, pull out all those paperwork. If that ever happened to us 5 years down the road after we have converted electronic, people would have no idea what's the paper chart, what's the paper form. So we need to build our new system with the sufficient redundancy, and that's another reason why the cost kept going up. Because when we were looking at the new Epic system, we realized we need to have 2 separate data warehouses, which we don't have quite in the right configuration yet. So we are still at risk, so until we actually switch over.
Well, we've addressed some of the goose problems. We call that code gray goose.
Canada goose.
All right.
Carry on.
I'll look back towards the audience. Do we have any Silvio?
Hi there, David. This question is for you. Looking at the screen and looking at how much demand there is in the organization, can you talk a little bit about the process by which the demand items can be prioritized and what we'll be working on? Because everybody needs something and everybody wants something and everybody's asking for something from a digital perspective. How will we funnel all of these requests and how will we communicate to the organization what will be done and what will not be done?
I mean, this is a super important thing. As I said at the beginning, everybody seems to think that digital has the answer, and there's finite resources. So when we built the operating model for digital, we learned that there's a supply and demand paradigm. Like it's almost like water. Digital, people need it, they need it, and how do we supply it back given that there's limited resources? So over the past year, we've built an engagement process where we have our voice of customer team, Duska from a clinical and corporate support, David Wilger from an education support, and Carl Vertanen from a research support perspective. And they've worked like amazingly, okay, this is true fact, okay, across the organization to understand the strategic direction, the needs of the business. And that's been very important. We've built our first roadmap that's fully transparent, motivated by the businesses. We know exactly what our priorities are, and we've limited that to within our resources to deliver that. That was one big lift. We've never had that before. And we went and showed that to the board. They were like, holy, you did it. It was a huge amount of work. And it wasn't just like, we want this. It was like, how much is it going to cost us to do this? And we worked, and the teams in digital and across the organization worked to map that out. That was our first ever digital roadmap for UHN. Also, during the course of the year, we had all the experts from within UHN who lead digital teams bring up their demand. And we had a platform that allows us to record this demand. So we need to make it a continuous process where we can listen to what's happening. And sometimes the demand could be complaints that the Wi-Fi is down or the Wi-Fi is slow. We have to listen to the smallest noise, the smallest complaint, because that could inform us about where we need to go next. And that process where our ears are wide open and the organization knows what we're working on and how we're spending our resources, that has to be super transparent. And so that's what we've been building. It'll take a couple of years to get really good at it. When we talked to the Bank of Montreal leadership around how they make their investments around digital, it took them 3 or 4 years to get good at that, where cadence is set up, capital demands are understood, projection for skills and manpower are well understood, and having a multi-year plan, which will come out of this piece around clinical information systems, then the organization knows where we're going. They're not in the dark, they're not wondering what's next. And so this process has to be matured and built. And it's a little rough. As I say, it's like in Forrest Gump when he's trying to run at the start. not very good. And she yells, run, Forrest, run. And eventually, I mean, he irons it out. We'll get there in our demand process. I hope that's helpful, Sylvia.
Thanks, David. So let's jump to the top question here. So, David, can you speak to some of the challenges we're having with email user data, and specifically how we're holding ourselves accountable to those issues and for those issues that we're potentially experiencing right now?
The question is no email user data in 2018? That one?
Yep, that's the one.
No email user data. What is it? What do you mean? I don't understand the question. Okay, so. Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, well, we had different organizations internally, and this is completely understandable. When business units need to get their work done, when digital was first starting, people deployed tools that needed to do to get their business done. Researchers needed to communicate, so they had an email system. In radiation medicine, we had no paper, so you had to have an email system that let us move the information around, because it's all electronic in radiation medicine. So they had to have its own email system. You know, UHN needed an email system, so they stood up. So we had different email systems, and that's perfectly natural. When technology first starts to come out, people who need it will deploy it first for their own purposes, and it's perfectly fine. But after a while, we realized, hey, that's the same stuff as we have over here, and we have to now go back and kind of harmonize that. And because we had all those different systems, we did not have a harmonized approach into who's here, who's who. And as a result, I'm sure, you know, do I type in TID? Do I put RMP /? Is it HI? Is it RIS? Is it research, UHNresearch.ca? Or I can't even book a meeting with that person. That was just a result of an organic growth of technology. So I wouldn't blame or fire anybody over that one. But there's a certain point in time where we have to say, okay. The variety is not helping us. It's hindering us. We need to clean it up. And if we do clean it up, we get all kinds of other advantages. We get automation. We can, you know, have greater security and many other things. So it was just time for that to happen. And it's going to be really important for us to be successful moving forward as well.
Thank you. So let's jump to the next question as well here. What are Kevin's priorities for this role and for his potential role and for UHN as a whole?
So Kevin was with us at the board retreat about 2 weeks ago, and he closed out the board retreat by saying that his top priority is to land on a strategic plan, I believe in 6 months, in less than a year, let's put it this way. And so, and obviously he understands that he also need to build up relationship because he's someone coming in from the outside. So basically reaching out to everyone, meeting everyone, understanding the issue, which he has already started. And he felt that the institution need to align with a strategic plan going forward. Not that I will try to predict anything, but I strongly suspect a digital transformation is probably a solid part of the strategic plan. So.
Thanks, Charlie. I'm going to pause there. Are there any additional questions in the audience? Yep, one at the top.
Hi, David.
Hey.
Facilities management, planning, redevelopment, recognizing where we sit and understanding that we support the clinical world, is there an opportunity to champion that part of the world, like, for example, with IP addresses and data drops, to support our needs in order to support the clinical space? Is there an opportunity to champion someone from IT transformation to assist in that category?
From a security perspective? Or
facilities as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, I think I mean, a hospital is a building that's wired. It's like a machine. I mean, I can't tell the difference between I always joke, the USS Enterprise in space, is it a building or is it a machine? Is it a building or is it a machine? It's a machine. And in the future, things are wired, things are connected. We'll have RFID and tables, and we'll track devices and we'll be able to document whether they're failing or whether they're configured consistently or there's a variation in practice. So one of the things we have to do is we have to realize that in this low-cost measurement world where there's a lot of data streaming, we're going to use the same tools as cybersecurity is using to monitor what's in the ecosystem. We're going to use those same tools to monitor quality and safety. And that means thinking about that kind of a wired hospital, whether it's millimeter wave technology for high bandwidth, and just thinking about that as our future. I think that's going to be critical. And so the alignment between digital infrastructure, I mean, that has to be really matured, and we have to start thinking about the future of what these hospitals will look like moving forward. I think that's key. And even from like a security perspective, the continuum there is remarkably interesting from a quality and safety and security perspective.
Thanks, David. So let's jump to the question at the top here. Can you talk a little bit about what we're doing in the area of online scheduling tools, appointment text reminders, those types of things? What are we doing to enable these types of tools internally at the moment?
Yeah, so we have actually a really exciting little project that you may not know about. There's something called a FHIR standard. That's a technical term which refers to fast hospital health information exchange standard. That's kind of an open standard. It's like a kind of a more open standard. And we've been working with Quadramed, which is our current EPR provider, and Slavin, tell me if I get this wrong. They've given us a release recently that has FHIR functionality on our Quadramed system that allows software systems to go in and edit the demographic data, the ADT data. And one of the things we're working on is to reveal access to that through the patient portal, because the patient portal could communicate. That would allow patients to come in and change the demographic data securely. And that's just a hint about what comes next. Because once we have scheduling exposed, they could consider changing schedules. Of course, there would be some constraints there. But I mean, the whole variety of interoperability through the patient portal framework. And I actually talked to Kevin about our patient portal. He was very positive. He was amazed that we have, pushing 50,000, I think, probably over 50,000 patients on there now. And the feedback that he's heard from people who use the portal are very positive. And so I think we have a great platform there, a great team there. David and Joy and Selena and many others working together to make this a digital experience for patients. And I think it's kind of cool that Quadramed, which is kind of an older company, has put this new technology and they're loaning it to us, and Slavin's team is connecting that to allow that to happen. So that's a little example.
Oh. Thanks, David. Any other questions in the audience?
I want Charlie to answer the second question.
Oh, you are all eager.
I think we have one at the top there.
Yeah, sure. One of the challenges we face on an ongoing basis is maintaining clinical engagement, even with our current EPR. Clinicians are busy. It's hard to get a hold of them. They're busy doing the good work that they do. What are we going to do with this system or any future system to ensure we have ongoing clinical engagement so that we can build systems for clinicians, by clinicians?
I think this is super important. It speaks to my comments earlier around the provider experience. And when we've gone through this digital roadmap activity, that's a one high-level piece around the big pieces. The next level is more specific technology, but we need to get down into the nuts and bolts. And I've been talking to the team about making what I refer to as councils that really start to bring the clinical teams really close to digital. And these individuals, clinicians, would be kind of like editors of sorts. Does this make sense? Is this going to work? And we've had good engagement across the organization in pockets, but we've never really run it at scale. And so one of the things we're working on in Dusk is specifically on the clinical domain, advancing this. Carl will advance something similar on research and patient, and on the education side, David doing something similar, where we want the clinical teams to own the decision-making around the functionality and features. But that dialogue has to get built, and we have to get everybody in the same boat, rowing in the same direction. And I think it's aligned with Barry's comments around the importance from a provider experience perspective. That has to be co-built. You can't just download stuff.
Thanks, David. All right, so we have 2 minutes. If we can, let's try and get through the two top questions here. We'll wrap up with the second one. David, is there a plan to improve the organization's corporate intranet in 60 seconds or less?
That's Jillian's. I'm just kidding. No, I hope so. I'm just kidding. No, the background technologies from a SharePoint perspective have really matured a lot, and we're very excited about starting to lean on that a little heavier. And now that we're all on one "Who are you" framework, it won't be so frustrating maneuvering through SharePoint, because I don't know how to log in if I'm this kind of person or this kind of person. That standardization will be very helpful. And what we're going to want to do, and this will come pretty soon, I think, is that we need to start to communicate to the rest of the organization. Let's start to use the new tools, the better tools that are now part of SharePoint to support corporate internet activities. It's a better platform for us now, and I think we could share and harmonize that a lot across the organization.
Great, thanks, David. And for the last question, Dr. Chan, what are your plans after May 22nd?
So a sigh of relief. So I'll hand over the role of the CEO, which I enjoyed for the last 7.5 months at the UHN. I could tell you when I started at UHN as a clinical clerk in the summer of 1980. Some of you weren't even born then. I don't think back in the summer of 1980 when I entered the Toronto General Hospital, I would ever imagine that I will end my career as the interim CEO. So it was quite a ride. I will stay on as a CMO to support our new CEO, Kevin, until the end of the year. And that's basically when I finish my 10 years. So that's my 10. For those of you who have read some of my previous articles, I'm a 10 years man. I basically take a job, I do it for 10 years, and then I look for some other opportunities. So I'll be around until the end of December in my other job, which is my regular job as a CMO. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Charlie. And just to wrap things up here, I'll pass it back to David for any final thoughts.
I have one more question, Charlie. What color is your hair going to be?
Purple, yellow, and pink. And you try and match that.
I'm going to match that.
All right.
We'll match that, Charlie.
Thanks, everyone.